11 Golden Age Hollywood stars who age terribly. Number 3 will shock you. They were once Hollywood's gods and goddesses. Faces so perfect, the world believed time would never touch them. But time doesn't care about fame. When the spotlight faded, it left behind transformations so shocking. Even their most devoted fans could barely recognize them. Today, we uncover 11 Golden Age Hollywood stars who aged in the most disturbing ways imaginable. Number 3 will shock you. It's absolutely heartbreaking. Mickey Rooney, the boy who grew old too soon. At one point, Mickey Rooney wasn't just famous. He was America's childhood itself. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, his face was everywhere. Bright eyes, boundless energy, a grin that felt unstoppable. He played the all-American boy so perfectly that the nation watched him grow up on screen and believed he would stay young forever. Studios crowned him Hollywood's top box office star. Teenagers adored him. Parents trusted him. Mickey Rooney wasn't acting youth. He was youth. But what the camera didn't show was how fast that boy was burning. Behind the cheerful smile lived a man running at full speed toward exhaustion. Alcohol flowed freely. Gambling followed. Relationships shattered one after another. While audiences saw innocence, Hollywood insiders saw excess. The industry rewarded him for being young, but never taught him how to stop. Then something cruel happened. Mickey didn't just age. He collapsed into age. By his early 50s, an age when many stars were still considered prime, his face had already surrendered. The skin sagged. The eyes dulled. The once electric expression now carried a permanent fatigue, like someone who had lived 3 lifetimes too fast. When he appeared on television in the 1970s, audiences gasped. The man who once played the boy next door looked old enough to be his own grandfather. The irony was brutal. Mickey Rooney would live to be 93 years old. But he spent more than half his life looking far older than his years. 8 marriages failed. Money vanished and returned, only to vanish again. Each divorce drained him emotionally. Each comeback demanded more effort from a body already worn thin. He kept working, not because he wanted to, but because stopping meant admitting the youth that defined him was gone. And Hollywood had no use for that truth. In his later years, Rooney spoke with clarity he never had as a star. He admitted the industry had chewed him up early, that fame had given him everything, then quietly taken it back with interest. His story isn't just about aging poorly. It's about being forced to grow up in public without ever learning how to grow old. Mickey Rooney didn't lose a battle with time. He was sent into it unarmed. Betty Hutton, the star who burned too bright. When Betty Hutton walked onto a stage, the room didn't just notice her. It exploded. In the 1940s, she was pure kinetic energy. Laughing, singing, dancing as if her body could barely contain the force inside it. Audiences didn't just watch Betty Hutton, they felt her. She wasn't the cool, distant kind of beauty. She was loud, vibrant, unstoppable. The studios called her a blonde bombshell, but that word never quite fit. Bombshells explode once. Betty burned constantly. On screen, she radiated joy. Off screen, she was quietly unraveling. The same intensity that made her magnetic also made her fragile. The pressure to stay on, to be bigger, brighter, faster than everyone else never stopped. Depression crept in. Prescription pills followed. What began as a way to cope slowly became a way to disappear. And when Hollywood sensed weakness, it did what it always does. It moved on. By the late 1950s, the phone rang less. Roles dried up. The applause faded. And without the roar of the crowd to drown out the silence, Betty was left alone with herself. That's when time truly caught her. Years passed without public appearances. Fans assumed she had retired gracefully. Then, in the 1970s, Betty resurfaced, and the shock was immediate. The woman standing under the studio lights barely resembled the star people remembered. Her once open, expressive face looked strained and unfamiliar. Cosmetic procedures meant to restore youth had done the opposite. Features were pulled too tight. Expressions froze mid-emotion. The warmth that once poured out of her eyes seemed trapped behind a mask. In a rare interview, Betty admitted the truth with heartbreaking honesty. "I don't look in mirrors anymore," she said. "The person there isn't me." That was the cruelest twist of all. Betty Hutton didn't just lose her looks. She lost recognition of herself. What the audience saw as a tragic transformation was, for Betty, a daily reminder of everything she'd been, and everything she couldn't get back. The industry that once celebrated her excess had no patience for the aftermath. No safety net. No second act worthy of her first. Her story isn't about vanity. It's about what happens when a person is valued only for the energy they give and abandoned when there's nothing left to take. Betty Hutton didn't fade quietly. She vanished slowly, behind a smile the world no longer recognized. Peter Lorre, the man who became his own shadow. Peter Lorre was never meant to be beautiful. And somehow, that was exactly what made him unforgettable. In his early years, there was something hypnotic about him. The round face. The wide, unblinking eyes. The soft, deliberate voice that could sound gentle one moment and deeply unsettling the next. In films like M and Casablanca, Lorre didn't need conventional charm. He commanded attention through presence alone. You couldn't look away, not because you wanted to, but because something about him demanded it. But the camera is merciless with time, and Peter Lorre's body was already fighting a losing battle. A serious back injury introduced him to morphine. What began as medical relief turned into lifelong dependence. Alcohol followed. So did chronic illness. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the man audiences recognized began to erode from the inside out. Then the erosion became visible. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, Lorre no longer looked merely unusual. He looked haunted. His once rounded face collapsed inward, cheeks hollowed as if carved away by suffering. Dark pits formed beneath his eyes, deep enough to cast permanent shadows. His skin turned pale, then gray, like color itself had abandoned him. Those famous eyes, once intense, once expressive, now bulged unnaturally from a face that seemed to be disappearing around them. In his final roles, something strange happened. Makeup artists weren't trying to make Peter Lorre look sinister anymore. They were trying to make him look alive. They added warmth to his skin, softened angles that pain had sharpened, lit him carefully, gently, as if the wrong shadow might make him vanish entirely. Off camera, friends worried. On camera, audiences stared, uncomfortable, unsettled, unsure of what they were witnessing. The transformation was so severe that when Vincent Price viewed Lorre's body at his funeral in 1964, he reportedly said something shocking but honest. He looked so much better dead than alive. It wasn't cruelty. It was grief. Because Peter Lorre hadn't aged naturally. He had been worn down. Every line on his face told the story of pain managed instead of healed, of brilliance dulled by dependency, of a man who gave everything to his craft while his body quietly surrendered. Peter Lorre didn't disappear suddenly. He faded frame by frame. His story is a reminder that not all aging comes from years. Some of it comes from endurance, from carrying pain too long, with nowhere safe to put it down. In the end, Peter Lorre didn't become a villain. He became a warning. Gloria Graham, when perfection wasn't enough. Gloria Graham had the kind of beauty Hollywood pretends is accidental, but secretly obsesses over. In the 1950s, her face didn't just fit the camera. It challenged it. Heavy-lidded eyes. A soft, sensual mouth. A look that suggested secrets, danger, and desire all at once. In film noir, she wasn't just a femme fatale, she was the standard. Critics praised her originality. Audiences couldn't forget her. An Academy Award only sealed what Hollywood already knew: Gloria Graham was rare. And that was exactly the problem. Because in a city built on illusion, even rare beauty isn't safe from doubt. Somewhere between success and insecurity, Gloria became fixated on one small detail: her upper lip. She believed it was too thin. Not enough. A flaw invisible to the world, but enormous to her. What began as a private worry soon became an obsession that refused to stay quiet. At first, the changes were subtle. Then they weren't. Gloria experimented. Procedures. Fillers. Desperate improvisations whispered about behind studio doors. Cotton, tissue, fat injections taken from her own body. Each attempt promised correction. Each one delivered damage. Her upper lip swelled unnaturally, pulling the balance out of her face. Scars formed. Muscles weakened. Eventually, part of her lip became partially paralyzed. The camera noticed everything. Directors began hiding her in shadow, shooting her from careful angles, lighting her face as if it were something fragile, because it was. Makeup could no longer restore what had been altered too many times. And when people who once knew her well crossed paths with her years later, some didn't recognize her at all. That was the cruelest twist. Gloria Graham had tried to fix a flaw that never existed. And in doing so, she erased the very feature that made her unforgettable. Today, film historians look back at her early performances with awe. They study her face frame by frame, calling it one of the most captivating in cinema history. The irony is devastating. The world spent decades celebrating the beauty Gloria couldn't see, until it was gone. Her story isn't about vanity. It's about fear. Fear of time. Fear of losing relevance. Fear of not being enough in a system that never says enough. Gloria Graham didn't age badly because of time. She aged because Hollywood taught her that perfection was fragile, and once broken, unforgivable. Orson Welles, the genius who couldn't escape his own gravity. Orson Welles entered Hollywood like a force of nature. At just 25, he rewrote the rules with Citizen Kane. Tall, commanding, razor-sharp, his voice alone could stop a room cold. He wasn't just brilliant. He looked brilliant. Intense eyes. A sculpted face. A presence so powerful it felt larger than the screen could contain. Orson Welles didn't chase greatness. Greatness arrived early and stayed heavy. But genius has weight. And over time, that weight began to show. As the years passed, Welles expanded. Slowly at first, then dramatically. His body grew, his face softened, and the sharp angles that once defined him disappeared beneath layers of excess. By the 1970s, the transformation was impossible to ignore. The once dashing prodigy now filled the frame in a completely different way. His eyes still burned with intelligence, but they peered out from swollen lids. His jawline vanished. His movements became labored, deliberate, cautious. The irony was painful. As his physical presence grew, his control over his career shrank. Hollywood had room for young geniuses, but little patience for aging ones who refused to compromise. Projects collapsed. Funding disappeared. Frustration set in. To cope, Welles leaned into habits that only accelerated the decline. Heavy meals, constant cigars, relentless drinking. Each indulgence added another layer, another year, to a body already under siege. He knew what was happening. Welles joked about his size publicly, wielding humor like a shield. But behind the wit was awareness. He dressed strategically, dark capes, flowing jackets, seated interviews. Cameras framed him carefully from the chest up. Makeup followed him even off set, adding color to a face drained by exhaustion. He wasn't hiding vanity. He was hiding vulnerability. By his early 60s, Welles moved like a man decades older. Breath came harder. Skin paled. Fatigue followed him everywhere. When he died at 70, the world mourned, but few were shocked. His appearance had prepared them for the ending long before it arrived. And that may be the cruelest part. Orson Welles didn't fail because he lacked discipline. He failed because his brilliance burned faster than his body could sustain. His story isn't about weight gain. It's about the toll of carrying unmatched talent in an industry that celebrates genius, then punishes it for lasting too long. In the end, Orson Welles didn't shrink into obscurity. He became too much for Hollywood, for his body, and for time itself. Bette Davis, the eyes that outlived everything else. People always said the same thing about Bette Davis. It was the eyes. They didn't just look at the camera, they challenged it. Sharp, unblinking, fearless. In her prime, those eyes carried rage, desire, cruelty, intelligence, and pain all at once. They made her unforgettable. 2 Academy Awards. Dozens of iconic roles. Bette Davis didn't need softness or beauty. She dominated through will. And for a long time, will was enough. But the body doesn't negotiate forever. Decades of chain-smoking carved their signature into her face. Deep lines formed early, giving her a severity that grew harsher with time. Then came the real turning point, strokes. One after another. The first in the early 1980s partially paralyzed her face and stole the crisp precision of her voice. The woman who once sliced through dialogue like a blade now struggled to shape words. When Bette appeared on talk shows in her final years, audiences were stunned into silence. Her face had become gaunt, almost skeletal. Skin stretched thin over bone, as if there was nothing left beneath it to support the legend. Her posture, once upright and commanding, curved forward into a permanent stoop. Even her hands, once expressive, theatrical, trembled with fragility. Weight fell away until she seemed barely anchored to the world. And yet, the eyes remained. In her final film, The Whales of August, she looked almost spectral. Costumes hung loosely on a frame worn down by decades of battle, against illness, against addiction, against an industry that never forgives aging women. Crew members recalled having to pause constantly, waiting for her strength to return between takes. But when the camera rolled, something extraordinary happened. Those eyes still burned. They seemed larger now, more intense, staring out from a face stripped of everything else. It was unsettling, powerful, almost cruel in its honesty. The body had surrendered, but the mind, the presence, refused to disappear. Bette Davis didn't age quietly. She aged publicly, defiantly, without apology. Her story isn't about vanity or regret. It's about endurance. She gave everything to her craft and paid for it in flesh and bone. In the end, what remained wasn't beauty or strength, but truth. A reminder that time can take the body, distort the image, and strip away the surface. But it can't always erase the force behind the eyes. Rita Hayworth, the tragedy the world mistook for a scandal. For a moment in history, Rita Hayworth wasn't just a movie star. She was a fantasy the world shared. In the 1940s, her image was everywhere, painted onto bomber planes, pinned inside lockers, tucked into the pockets of soldiers crossing oceans. When she tossed her head back in Gilda, red hair cascading like fire, she didn't just captivate audiences. She defined desire. Rita Hayworth became the face of glamour, elegance, and effortless beauty. The world believed she had it all. What the world didn't see was how quietly she was losing herself. In the early 1960s, something began to change. Rita, once famous for memorizing complex dance routines and dialogue with ease, started forgetting lines. On set, she seemed distracted, confused. Directors grew impatient. Studio whispers followed. Friends noticed she repeated stories, lost her sense of direction, struggled to stay focused. Hollywood found an explanation that felt comfortable. They blamed alcohol. And for years, so did Rita. As time passed, the transformation became impossible to ignore. Her movements slowed. The graceful dancer now shuffled, uncertain with every step. Her once expressive face settled into a vacant, distant expression, eyes searching, mouth slightly open, as if words were always just out of reach. Her weight fluctuated. Her appearance grew disheveled. In public, she sometimes failed to recognize people she had known for decades. The breaking point came in the mid-1970s. During a film shoot, Rita repeatedly forgot her lines, simple lines she had rehearsed moments earlier. Production halted. Crew members watched in silence as one of the greatest icons in Hollywood history stood alone in her dressing room, confused, unable to recognize her own reflection in the mirror. This wasn't vanity fading. This was identity dissolving. Only years later did the truth finally surface. Rita Hayworth wasn't careless. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't drunk. She was suffering from Alzheimer's disease, at a time when the illness was barely understood, rarely diagnosed, and deeply stigmatized. By the time the public learned the truth, it was almost too late. In her final appearances, fans were devastated. The legendary beauty looked bloated and fragile, her face frozen into a mask that no longer responded to emotion. Her famous red hair hung limp, unmanaged. Her eyes, once alive with mischief and seduction, now carried confusion and fear. Many refused to believe the images were real. Some thought they were cruel exaggerations. They weren't. Rita Hayworth spent nearly 2 decades disappearing in slow motion, aware enough to feel fear, but not enough to understand why. She died in 1987, having long forgotten her films, her fame, and the woman the world adored. Her story changed everything, because for the first time, the public saw Alzheimer's not as an abstract illness, but as a thief that could steal even the brightest star. Rita Hayworth didn't age badly. She was misunderstood while she was being erased. And that is what makes her story unbearable and unforgettable. Montgomery Clift, the face that never fully came back. Montgomery Clift arrived in Hollywood like a revelation. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flashy. He didn't dominate the screen by force. Instead, he pulled you in, with vulnerability, with sensitivity, with a beauty that felt almost fragile. In the early 1950s, his face seemed sculpted for close-ups, sharp cheekbones, soulful eyes, a quiet intensity that made audiences lean forward rather than sit back. Alongside Marlon Brando and James Dean, Clift reshaped masculinity. He made pain look human. Then one night changed everything. On May 12, 1956, leaving a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's home, Clift's car slammed into a telephone pole. The impact shattered his face, broken nose, fractured jaw, crushed sinus bones. Part of his face was partially paralyzed. Doctors rebuilt what they could, but symmetry, the very thing the camera loved, was gone forever. When Montgomery Clift returned to the screen, the difference was unmistakable. One side of his face still carried echoes of the man audiences adored. The other seemed frozen, sunken, slightly off, like a reflection that no longer lined up with reality. He could still act, but the camera now told a different story. Pain lingered in every expression. Even stillness looked strained. But the deeper damage wasn't visible. Clift lived with constant pain after the accident. To manage it, he turned to alcohol and prescription pills. What began as survival became dependence. His body thinned. His skin dulled. Deep lines carved themselves into a face that was barely past 40. Within just a few years, he looked decades older, fragile, exhausted, worn down by something relentless. By the early 1960s, the transformation was devastating. His movements slowed, stiff and uncertain. His voice, once gentle and controlled, sounded weak and strained. Dark circles hollowed his eyes. In his final film, The Defector, 1966, completed shortly before his death at 45, Montgomery Clift was almost unrecognizable from the luminous young man of From Here to Eternity. Those who worked with him felt like they were watching someone fade in real time. Elizabeth Taylor, one of his closest friends, called it the longest disappearance in Hollywood history. Not a sudden fall, but a slow erosion. A man still alive, still working, but slipping further away with each passing year. Montgomery Clift didn't age naturally. He aged traumatically. His story isn't about vanity or bad choices alone. It's about what happens when beauty becomes a burden and survival leaves scars the camera can't forgive. Some faces grow old. Montgomery Clift's was broken and never fully healed. Janet Leigh, frozen in a moment she couldn't escape. Janet Leigh's scream changed cinema forever. In Psycho, her face filled the screen, eyes wide, mouth open, terror crystallized into a single, unforgettable moment. But long before that shower scene, Janet Leigh represented something gentler. She was the girl next door with movie star polish. Warm smile, bright eyes. A beauty that felt natural, effortless, human. Audiences trusted her face because it felt honest. And for years, time treated her kindly. But Hollywood has a way of whispering doubts, especially to women whose power lives in their expressions. As Janet aged, she watched the industry shift around her. New faces, younger skin, tighter frames. Opportunities narrowed. The message was subtle but relentless. Stay young or step aside. So she tried to stay. In the late 1970s, Janet Leigh turned to cosmetic procedures, early versions of techniques that hadn't yet learned restraint. One adjustment became another. Facelifts too close together. Fillers layered before the previous ones had settled. Each choice promised preservation. Each one quietly took something away. At first, the changes were minor. Then the camera began to struggle. By the 1980s, Janet's face no longer moved the way it once had. Skin stretched unnaturally tight across her cheekbones. When she smiled, parts of her face responded while others stayed still. Her eyes, once warm and expressive, appeared permanently widened, locked into a look of surprise that never quite softened. The cruel irony was impossible to ignore. The woman most famous for a look of fear now seemed trapped inside one. Directors noticed. Lighting became difficult. Subtle expressions vanished under a smooth, waxy surface that reflected light instead of emotion. The tools that once captured her humanity now revealed the cost of trying to preserve it. At public appearances, fans struggled with the contrast. Janet was still elegant, still poised, still unmistakably herself in voice and presence. But her face told a different story, one frozen between youth and age, unable to fully belong to either. At the 50th anniversary screening of Psycho, the moment felt almost symbolic. On screen, a young Janet Leigh screamed in terror. On stage, decades later, her face barely moved at all. The fear was gone, but so was the freedom. Her story isn't about vanity. It's about timing. Janet Leigh didn't chase youth recklessly. She chased it too early, with tools that weren't ready, and paid the price in expression. In trying to hold on to what made her beloved, she lost the subtle movements that made her human. Some stars age into legends. Janet Leigh became frozen in a moment, unable to step fully forward or back. Edward G. Robinson. When the tough guy finally looked tired. Edward G. Robinson never needed to be handsome. His power came from something harder. In his prime, Robinson's face was a weapon. Heavy-lidded eyes that could intimidate with a glance. A sharp voice that cut through scenes like a blade. In Little Caesar, he didn't just play a gangster, he became the blueprint. Strength, control, authority. Even at 5 feet 5 inches, he filled the screen with menace and confidence. His face told you exactly who he was before he ever spoke. But time has a way of softening even the hardest edges. Decades of chain smoking, cigars clenched between his fingers on and off screen, slowly rewrote his features. Lines deepened, skin thickened, then sagged. The eyes that once burned with intensity began to sink beneath heavy folds. What had once looked formidable now looked fatigued. Then came illness. Heart problems forced Robinson onto strong medications, many of which caused fluid retention. His face puffed and bloated, erasing the sharp contours that once defined him. Jowls sagged, bags formed beneath his eyes. His skin took on a dull, uneven tone, marked by age spots and discoloration. The camera, once his ally, now captured a man who looked constantly exhausted. But the deepest damage wasn't physical. During the McCarthy era, Robinson was accused, investigated, and dragged before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Though eventually cleared, the experience humiliated him. Friends said the stress aged him overnight. The defiant posture he once carried straight and proud bent forward, as if the weight of suspicion had settled permanently on his shoulders. By the late 1960s, the transformation was undeniable. In his final films, including Soylent Green, Robinson no longer dominated scenes, he endured them. His movements were slower. His voice, once forceful, sounded weary. Makeup artists tried to restore color to his face, but the results often looked artificial, unable to mask the truth underneath. One director quietly summed it up after working with Robinson late in his career. The face that launched 1,000 gangsters has run aground. Edward G. Robinson didn't age into irrelevance. He aged into vulnerability. His story isn't about losing power. It's about what happens when a man known for strength is finally allowed to look worn out. Time didn't defeat him in a single blow. It wore him down slowly, until toughness gave way to humanity. And in that final act, Edward G. Robinson no longer looked like a gangster. He looked like a man who had fought too many battles, and finally needed rest. Mae West. the woman who refused to age. Mae West didn't fear time. She challenged it. In the 1930s, she was scandal-wrapped in satin, curves, confidence, and a voice dripping with innuendo. Mae West didn't just push boundaries, she laughed while stepping over them. Hollywood didn't know what to do with her, but audiences couldn't get enough. She was desire, defiance, and control all in one body. And from the very beginning, she made one thing clear: she would never fade quietly. So she made a decision few dared to make. She would never age, at least not on screen. As decades passed, Mae West kept the same platinum blonde hair, the same heavy makeup, the same tight gowns, the same sultry persona she had perfected in her 30s. While the world changed around her, she remained frozen in a carefully constructed image of eternal sexuality. But time didn't agree to the arrangement. By the time she returned to film in the 1970s and late 70s, the contrast was jarring. At 77, then 85, Mae West still played the seductress. Men decades younger surrounded her, desired her, chased her, at least according to the script. Under studio lights, the illusion struggled to hold. Thick makeup cracked and settled into natural lines. Wigs sat unnaturally still. Her movements slowed, stiff and cautious, even as she attempted the same hip-swaying walk that once defined her. The performance became unsettling. Behind the scenes, reality pressed harder. Her eyesight deteriorated so severely that she could no longer read her lines. Dialogue was fed to her through a hidden earpiece, resulting in strange pauses and disconnected delivery. Scenes had to be broken into fragments because her body couldn't sustain longer takes. The woman who once controlled every frame was now being carefully managed by it. Critics were merciless. One famously wrote that watching her final performance was like watching your grandmother perform a striptease. The comment was cruel, but it revealed something deeper. The discomfort didn't come from age itself. It came from the refusal to acknowledge it. Mae West never pretended she was young. She insisted she still was. "I never worried about age," she said. "I'll always be a young woman who is aged." But the camera told a harsher truth. By refusing to age naturally, Mae West didn't preserve her legend. She transformed it into something surreal. Not youth, not wisdom, but a theatrical echo of who she once was, replayed long after the moment had passed. Her story isn't about vanity. It's about control. Mae West spent her life owning her image. In the end, that image owned her back. Time cannot be denied, only delayed, disguised, or resisted. And the harder it's resisted, the louder it announces itself. Mae West didn't age badly. She refused to age at all. And in that refusal, the illusion finally broke. When the spotlight finally fades, they were once untouchable. Faces frozen in celluloid. Smiles that felt eternal. But time doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how bright the lights were, or how loud the applause sounded. Each of these stars fought aging in their own way. Some ran from it. Some denied it. Some were betrayed by illness, by pain, by an industry that loved them only while they stayed young. What remains isn't just shock. It's a question. Were they destroyed by time? Or by a world that taught them their worth had an expiration date? These stories aren't just about Hollywood. They're about all of us. About how we chase youth, fear change, and struggle to accept that aging isn't failure, it's survival. Because the real tragedy isn't growing old. It's being forgotten before you're allowed to. So tell us, which story affected you the most? Which transformation stayed with you after the screen went dark? Leave a comment below. We read everyone. And if these untold stories matter to you, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because there are many more Hollywood truths still waiting to be told. The spotlight fades, but the stories should never disappear.